Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. We have a very exciting match to get stuck into. Jannik Sinner versus Daniil Medvedev, and it is a fourth meeting between the two this year. Can you believe it? And arguably the rivalry of the year. Episode 4 is what Matchflow Graphics are saying. We've teamed up with them to get into the nitty-gritty and analyze their form, give some interesting nuggets of information, and of course break down tactically and also strategically how the match will play out. We'll talk about their head-to-head. We'll talk about their route as well to this stage of the quarterfinals, and ultimately I will give you guys my prediction. We're also going to dive into the match flows for the Australian Open final and that Wimbledon match they had as well. Of course, in Grand Slam, sorry, even it is one win apiece. So very interesting going into this US Open quarterfinal. And given the people that are left in the draw, you could argue this is almost like a final. Apart from maybe someone like Alexander Zverev, who even then I think Jannik Sinner and Daniil Medvedev are the number 1 and 2 favorites left in the draw. No Alcaraz, no Djokovic. This is a really big match in the scheme of things. It's bigger than a quarterfinal, given who's left in the draw as well. Before we do get into it, though, remember that like button, do subscribe if you're new, and do leave a rating or review if you're listening on a podcast platform. Okay, so for Jannik Sinner, he has Simone Vagnozzi and Darren Cahill in his corner, of course, and he's number 1 at the moment. For Daniil Medvedev, he's got Gilles Sevara, and he's also got Gilles Simon in his corner, if I'm not mistaken, as well. He is a number 5 right now, and he was number 1 2 years ago. He's, of course, won 1 Grand Slam at the US Open in 2021 when he stopped Novak Djokovic from winning the calendar slam. And for Jannik Sinner, he has that single Grand Slam this year at the Australian Open. So looking to add to that, both these players, single Grand Slam winners, looking to add to their tallies. In terms of win predictors, the match I've actually gone, and this is very interesting, 70% in favor of Jannik Sinner. I definitely would not be giving him that much of an advantage in this match, and we'll discuss why. I think this is going to be a really interesting matchup, and we're going to get into it now. In terms of form, and let's get into that first. So, Daniil Medvedev, you can see on screen, has a 75% win rate this year so far, and also has some interesting wins. In terms of wins against top 10 players, he's played 10 matches, 5 wins and 5 losses, so 50%. And his hard court win percentage is 79%, so bigger than his grass or clay court percentages. No surprises there. He is a hard court specialist, as he likes to say. He has 5 top 10 wins, as we said, over Dimitrov, Sinner, Dimitrov twice, Sinner, Hakac, and Zverev. And no title wins this year, but a final, of course, at the Australian Open when he was 2 sets to love up, ended up losing it, and also lost in Indian Wells as well in the final to Carlos Alcaraz. At Wimbledon, he lost in the semifinals to Alcaraz. In Miami, also lost to Jannik Sinner. So quite a few of the big title losses have come at the hand of some very good players. Some outliers like Cincinnati and Montreal when he lost to Lehechka and Daldich Fokina respectively, but he's picked up his level and form going into the US Open. And interesting, of course, that he played the Olympics on clay, lost to Felix Auger-Aliassime in the round of 16, and it probably took him a bit of time to then get adapted to the hard courts, but it looks like he's okay. He doesn't look fatigued. He looks like he's playing some of his best tennis, and he'll come into this very confident, I'm sure. For Jannik Sinner, he's had a 91% win rate this year. I mean, arguably the player of the season. He's just had a phenomenal year. 14 matches against the 10 or the top 10, 10 wins and 4 losses. That's 71% win rate against the top 10 players, which is phenomenal. On hardcourt, he has a 94% win rate, so only 2 losses on hardcourt this year out of 34 matches. On clay, an 85% win rate, and grass, and a 90% win rate. In terms of tournaments won, he's won Australia or the Australian Open, Rotterdam, Miami, and Halle. And on top of that, Cincinnati recently. So that's already 5 titles this year. And he's looking mighty good, it has to be said. There is the slight asterisk where he tested positive at Indian Wells in that round of 32 match against Jan Struff. So since then, of course, he would have known that he was positive. And yeah, I mean, look, again, I don't want to get into it too much, but let's just assume that he's clean and it was just a mistake for the purpose of all future videos. I think it's probably the best thing to do. But yeah, I mean, look, he's really good. He's a really good wins over Zverev, you know, win over Zverev, and 2 wins over Rublev. Catches got a win over Dimitrov twice, Medvedev twice, Djokovic once, Dimona. I mean, these are good wins. Runa, TFO, he's running through people like no tomorrow. And Tommy Paul in the round of 16. I was thinking it's going to be a very physical match. I thought that Sinner would win, but I thought Tommy Paul would maybe take a set off him at least. Wasn't to be. 2 tiebreakers, played clutch. Jannik Sinner was a breakdown that first set, recovered really, really nicely. So there you can see that McDonald, Mickelson, O'Connell, and Paul. So really good run from Jannik Sinner so far. Hasn't looked too troubled. And I forgot to mention for Daniil Medvedev, Lajovic, Marijan, Koboli, and Borges. So he's had an easier route, you could argue. Although Koboli in the third round is definitely not an easy match, that's for sure. Very talented young Italian. Okay, now what I want to do is very briefly break down a couple of their matches this year. And look, I mean, we can talk about Miami, but there wasn't really a huge amount to talk about, if I'm being honest. So I'm going to ignore that one for now, because that was 6-1, 6-2 in favor of Sin. It was very clinical. I want to look at this Wimbledon quarterfinal, the most recent one. Then we're going to look at the Australian Open final. So you can see here, the Wimbledon quarterfinal, the first set, no breaks of serve in that first set. Clinical serving display from both players. And then Sinner ends up taking the tiebreak 9-7. What's interesting is Daniil Medvedev has a set point at 6-5 on his serve. So that is, yeah, I mean, he would have been extremely disappointed, I think, to lose that point. And it just shows the swing of momentum, because then after that, Sinner has 2 opportunities and he takes it, the second one, and goes on to then take the set. I mean, look, it was a very impressive first set from both players, very high level. And then Medvedev takes his second set at 6-4. And this is an interesting one because he was knocking on the door. Sinner no break points in this one. And you can see that game at 1-all. Medvedev has 40-15 and takes the break point at the first time of asking. Then they have a really long game at 3-1 on Sinner's serve. And in the second juice, Sinner has advantage again. No breakpoint opportunities for Medvedev in that game. He does hold 2-3, but he's still a breakdown. And then what Medvedev does really well is keep on pressing on Sinner's serve, saying, okay, you're not serving that great, so I'm going to keep on pressing you. Takes into 15-40 on Sinner's serve, 30-40. Okay, doesn't manage to break, fine. Sinner holds, takes a bit of confidence, but he's struggling on serve. 4-3 Medvedev still on, still in front on that break point. Sorry, with that break even. Medvedev then holds 5-3 and then 5-4, pretty straightforward service games. And at 5-4, Medvedev serves out to 15 to win the set 6-4. So it was really that 1-all game, that single break point for Medvedev in that very sloppy game, you could say, from Sinner, gave Medvedev that set. And that was a real important moment for both players. In terms of the third set, so Medvedev takes that in a tiebreaker, 7-6. So he was 2 sets to 1 up in this match. And you can see that 1-all again. He has a break point at 15-40, takes the break point, and then runs with it all the way up until 5-4. No breaks, no breakpoint opportunities. Again, there's a pretty long game at 2-4 on Sinner's serve, but Sinner manages to hold. Doesn't seem to gain huge amount of momentum from it though, and they just keep on serving pretty well. No breakpoint opportunities until 5-4 on Medvedev's serve, and Sinner then makes his move. He goes 40-love up on Medvedev's serve. Doesn't take the first breakpoint, but he takes the second one and pushes him back on serve. And then what's interesting here is that actually, at 5-6, Medvedev has a really long game. And these are the types of games, because it was a 4-juice game. These are the types of games that when they go on longer and longer, you feel like the momentum really does shift with whoever wins. It doesn't matter if it's a break or it's a hold. The momentum is normally then with that player, at least for a short period of time. And Sinner had a couple of break points, break and set points at 5-6 on Medvedev serve at 30-40 and add up. Couldn't take them. Medvedev holds, takes it to 6-all, and then he takes a tiebreaker 7-4. So just shows that him holding there gave him a bit of a mental and confidence boost in that tiebreaker, and it made a big difference. And then in the fourth set, Sinner then starts to take over. He has two breakpoint opportunities at 1-all and 3-1. He takes both of them very clinically and gets through the game, gets through this set actually pretty quickly as well, winning at 6-2. And then if we look at this fifth and final deciding set, you can see his Sinner had no breakpoint opportunities. A couple of very long games, especially that 3-1 game. 3-1 up, Medvedev in a breakup. They had 5 juices on Medvedev's game. No breakpoint opportunities for Sinner. But if he takes that game, it could change. Instead, he goes 4-1 up, Medvedev, and then it's just a foregone conclusion by the looks of it. Medvedev did have 3 break points on Sinner's serve at 2-1 up. Love 40, 15-40, and also 30-40, where eventually Sinner succumbs to the pressure. Medvedev ends up breaking, and then he ends up taking a set 6-3 at the first time of asking on match points. An impressive performance from Medvedev there. Then if we look at the final, not a huge amount really to talk about, if I'm being honest. It was, pretty tipsy-turvy final, and I think we don't even need to show it, to be honest, because it was one of those matches where it was a game or a match of two halves. Medvedev takes the first 2 sets, looks really strong. Sinner regroups, comes up trumps in the third set, and then pushes on to win the fourth and fifth sets pretty comfortably. Okay, let's break it down tactically and strategically. So it's an interesting one because the head-to-head between the two, at one stage, it was just so lopsided in favor of Daniil Medvedev. It really was. And now is different because Sinner has been able to figure out a way to play against Medvedev. It doesn't always work. Greatest example of that is at Wimbledon, but it seems to have some effects. 7-5 in favor of Medvedev. Sinner, so Medvedev had won 6 matches against Sinner in a row until Sinner has now won 5, or he had won 5 in a row until Medvedev beat him at Wimbledon. So, yeah, it's been a very interesting final. Sorry, very interesting. It will be a very interesting quarterfinal. Can't wait to get into it. But yeah, tactically, I think there's a few things, for Sinner. Let's summarize it in terms of what does Sinner need to do to get the win here. So, one, he needs to be patient in the rallies. He can't just bail out when Medvedev is being that backboard, vary it up. I think he needs to come forward. I've seen him serve and volley at times against Medvedev, or serve, +1 transition, then, some volleys as well. But yeah, I think his volleying and his net game is going to be crucial against Medvedev at times. Okay, so the things that Sinner needs to do against Medvedev to win. Let's get into that. So, first of all, Sinner needs to be really patient in the rallies and choose his moments when to go on the front foot and be aggressive. He can't bail out the rallies. If he bails out the rallies, it's going to be difficult. I know he can hit those phenomenal running forehands and he can hit lines, and he will do that at times against Medvedev. There's no doubt about it, but he needs to pick those moments because against Medvedev, if you give him easy points, if you give him a lot of free points and unforced errors, his confidence just grows monumentally because he is the type of player who builds on other people's errors. He is a counter puncher. He is that wall that everyone knows, the octopus. And he's the type of player that if he sees that he's able to get a lot of free errors, he's thinking, well, I'm going to get a lot of forced errors out of you anyway. And that's something that I think Sinner doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to give Medvedev momentum like that. So that's the first thing I think that's really important. And, I think for him, it shouldn't be too difficult because in the backhand to backhand, a lot of people would struggle against Medvedev. Medvedev's got a very, very solid backhand, as we know. And his trajectory is very flat on both wings, especially on the backhand side. It's very shovel-like. But Sinner's very good at getting low on the backhand. He's actually arguably one of the best, if not the best player on tour getting low to the backhand. A lot of players would slice that a lot of the balls that he tends to hit as a drive backhand, and he tends to find good angles quite low down, which is pretty rare. So picks it up quite nicely around the ankles, if I'm being honest, which is a real positive against someone like Medvedev. And yeah, I mean, I think for him, he just needs to be patient in those rallies. When he gets the opportunity to hit a good angle cross court or change direction and go line, do it. Be the proactive one, but don't just bail out quickly. And if he can get a look onto the into in or into out forehand, then that's even better, right? Because then he can start really being aggressive in those exchanges. The second point, and this is quite an important one, and something that both players did really well at Wimbledon, and that's the serve. He needs to serve well. You know, these courts have been quite quick as well at the US Open, and not as quick as the Australian Open, but they seem to be a quicker surface than the usual courts at Flushing Meadows in the last few years. And something that Sinner's really improved upon in his game since becoming the player that he is today and the world number one and Grand Slam champion is the serve and being able to rely on it in big moments and have it carry him through matches and make his life a lot easier by giving him some more free points on serve. And that's going to be important because there's going to be some long grinding rallies against Medvedev and it can be very, very physical. As Novak Djokovic would say, you know, he hates playing Medvedev because the rallies are just so physical against him. He really does grind it out. And even if Sin is ultra aggressive, you know, there inevitably will be some really, really long rallies. So any 3 points he can get on serve are going to be really, really key, I think, for him to get over the line. And then thirdly, I think it's the tactics utilized. So the variation. And I think it's important against Medvedev because if you just kind of hit at one pace at him, he just soaks it up, deflects it, almost sends it back at times with more pace, finds great angles, and just he'll kill you from the baseline. So Sinner, we've seen, you know, different iterations of Sinner's tactics against Medvedev, and I think we've got to the stage where he's realized that yes, serving and volleying at times is the right play, but it's not the only play. He can't be predictable doing it because if you serve and volley against Medvedev, say on the juice side, and you serve out wide, and you're coming forward, and that serve isn't good enough, you just think I can just float it cross court, sorry, float it out wide, then come to the net because he's so far out. Oh, you know, I'm going to get an easy volley into the open court. Even if it's a tough volley, I'll still be able to hit it, and he'll probably never get to it. Next thing you know, he gets there, and then not only does he make the forehand, but he hits a pinpoint forehand right, you know, a meter inside the baseline, a meter from the sideline, and he ends up being a return winner. And you're stranded in no man's land while trying to come to the net. So, yeah, look, he needs to be selective about when he comes in, but it's definitely a tactic to utilize. I think the serve volley, we know that he stands further back. He can adjust the return position against Sinner. I think he was standing almost in between. So between the baseline and the 5 meters that we're used to, I think he's around 2-3 meters. If he does that, then it gives him something to think about again, and it's very interesting. Of course, I still think he should utilize it at times. I don't see why not as a tactic, but obviously he wouldn't utilize it as readily maybe if Medvedev was standing a slightly further forward. I do also think in the rallies, though, he needs to come forward at times because it's important, right? To try and shorten the points, and when he's really on the front foot and Medvedev is grinding him out, you know, Medvedev is one of those players like an Alcaraz or a Sinner that actually there's moments, or Djokovic, where there'll be a rally and you feel like, oh, there's no way he's going to win that rally. He'll be on the back foot throughout, and then somehow he manages to turn the point on his head and get back to neutral somehow with some miraculous shot that drops in deep when he's on the stretch, looking like he's about to topple over into the stands. And then even further than that, somehow he manages to then get onto the attack. And it's like, how did you get to that point 2 or 3 shots ago? So, you know, it's important that Sinner doesn't give Medvedev loads of those opportunities to get back into that neutral position, and that means coming forward to the net and hitting those really potent approach shots and then volleying well. He needs to mix up the approach shots, not just go to one side, needs to use angles, different shapes, and then come forward and finish off those volleys. And that's going to be important. The drop shot as well, I think, is an important thing to utilize against Medvedev. Again, if he's standing really far back, he's not hugging the baseline, then hit that drop shot. The serve drop shot combination is not a bad one to utilize at times as well if you're standing further back. And we know it can be a really useful tool. We've seen Alcaraz use it really well against Medvedev in the past. And then finally, I think on the tactics, the slice. I think it's a great variation, of course, to use against Medvedev. Despite him being extremely athletic, and I think he doesn't necessarily hit a bad backhand down his ankles, he's not going to be able to hurt you with that backhand. So I think it's a good shot to utilize against Medvedev, a good shot to just hit well. And sorry, not just hit well, just sorry. It's a good shot to utilize in just utilizes the changeup. Utilizes the changeup, disrupt the rhythm of Medvedev. If Jannik feels like he's getting pumped from the baseline, or Medvedev's really starting to find rhythm and crunch him from it, then what I would do is if I was Sinner, I would say, well, let's change up the pace. Whether that's hit a slightly more shaped forehand, more topspin, more loop a bit slower, or find a different angle, a shorter angle, or use that slice. And I think that's not a bad option. As long as it's a potent slice, and sometimes it can just be a floated one, but I think, I think with Medvedev, even it's a floated slice, he will run around it and hit into a forehand or into the forehand and try and be aggressive, and that's when you could be in trouble. So yeah, he needs to make sure that when he's hitting it so that Medvedev has to hit a backhand, sorry, and a backhand low, and it's not going to be a comfortable shot for him. That's the key, I think. So on Medvedev, so the things that he needs to do to win. We mentioned it for Sinner, and then the same holds true for Medvedev. The serve is just going to be so key. On hard court, it always is, I find, on faster surfaces. And, he served really well at Wimbledon. He got the win in 5 sets and served well throughout the majority of the match. And he needs to do the same. And look, when Medvedev serves well, he becomes a very, very difficult player to beat because he gets through his service games really quickly as well. There's not large gaps in between points. He picks up the balls, he just gets through it. Sometimes they're 40-second games. It's just incredible. And it really does kill the opponent having to then serve, a minute, just 2 minutes later. If there's a changeover, if there's no changeover, then it's literally a minute later having to serve again and have pressure on them. So it can be really taxing as an opponent if you're having to face Medvedev when he's serving really well. Um, so yeah, I think that's really important. And then I think he needs to be a bit brave, or a bit braver than at times he has been in some of the losses to Sinner, and he was at Wimbledon with that +1. I'm not saying to go for a winner on the first ball, but what I am saying is I think he needs to hunt either the forehand or look. I mean, he's got a very good backhand, but he needs to try and make something out of that +1 shot so that he's on the front foot more often than not. So he can try and get Sinner on the back foot and shorten those points because the longer points on his serve are just not ideal because what Sinner has proven that he's very adept at doing since breaking his losing streak to Medvedev is that he's able to actually get in to the rallies and some of those longer points. I mean, the majority of the longer points that Medvedev was winning against Sinner in those first, 6 matches that he won against Sinner, since Sinner beat him, those longer points now, they have not been as dominant for Medvedev as they were in the past. Sinner is starting to win a larger portion of those points, so they're not a given like they might have been in the past. So something for Medvedev to bear in mind. He's going to have to win a higher proportion, which he was doing at Wimbledon, of shorter points to then combat that and make sure he can still get the win, right? So that does mean being more clinical when he has the chance and pulling the trigger. And he can still give himself margin for error, but he hits the ball so flat and he's got great accuracy. So he needs to back himself to do that against Sinner, and it's important that he does to give himself the best possible chance of winning. Then I think it gets interesting, and I do wonder with Medvedev whether this is a tactic to utilize or not. But I think the forehand's a forehand. I don't think he wants to get stuck in that pattern. I don't think it's a favorable pattern for him. So I think he needs to be the one that goes line first and is proactive. And I don't think he minds getting stuck on the backhand to backhand, despite Sinner having a very solid backhand. I think Medvedev will back himself more in that exchange. I also think it's not a bad option at times when Medvedev feels like he's not able to get into or get onto the front foot in a point to then go deep down the middle and give Sinner no angle to use and get him to hit a difficult shot. If Medvedev's hitting a shot, half a meter within the baseline, pinpoint flat forehand, for example, with pace on it at Sinner, for Sinner to then change direction and go into out with the forehand, for example, or cross court and hit with good depth and pace is not easy. It's not easy at all. So you might be able to change direction, but it's not going to be a winner, that's for sure, more likely than not. And it's probably not going to be an aggressive shot. It's going to be a neutral shot at best. So that gives Medvedev the opportunity to be the first one to hit an effective, aggressive shot in that rally by doing so, by utilizing those deep ground strokes down the middle. And I think it's not a bad option against Sinner, to be honest. I also saw that he came to the net at times. Medvedev, as we saw against Sinner, I think he has to be very, very selective about this. His hands are not great and not as good as Sinner's. I don't think his transition game is as good as well. But we have seen at times him utilize it effectively. So I don't want to completely shut down the idea of him utilizing it. I think it's a good change up. It's just a question of, I think he needs to utilize it when 90% of the time, or 90% of those points, when he does it, are points where he gets a really easy volley. Because I just feel like his volley technique is just so abnormal. And yes, I know it seems to be relatively effective, but he also misses some really easy volleys at times that then reminds you that look, his technique is definitely I don't know, leaves something to be desired on the volleys, that is. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the tactics and what both players need to do to win the match. Let me know in the comment section below who you think is going to win and why. I'm going to go with Jannik Sinner to win in 5 sets. I would not be surprised if Medvedev wins. I wouldn't be surprised if he wins in straight sets or 4 sets either, or whether the same happens to Sinner. But this, I do think whoever wins this goes on to win the title. I do think that. It's going to be a really, really interesting match. So stay tuned. Thank you very much, guys. Stay safe and well, and we'll see you on the next video.